What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some impressions for Fable 2. As I move to look at the original trilogy before the reboot is slated to release next year in 2025. I've played all of them previously, but not for some time, and I'd like a frankly more up-to-date view of them before that game rolls around so I can give it proper context. With that said, as a quick note, if you're one of my regular viewers and you're wondering where Phantom Doctrine is, that is coming probably this weekend, and due to some scheduling stuff, this was just easier to put up now rather than later. But very broadly speaking, my memories of Fable 2 were largely that it was my least favorite of the original trilogy, and that I didn't care for the magic system, and the story really wasn't that impressive either. And given that the last time I played this is pushing like 15 years ago, I didn't remember a ton else. But like pretty much any game that old, oftentimes your first experiences with it come down to getting it running. And as this is a PC channel, you may just very well be asking yourself how it is that I'm playing this, seeing as this game never got a PC release, and was only ever formally released on the Xbox 360. And the answer is that, simply put, if you're playing anywhere besides Xbox One or Xbox Series X and S, you're probably going to have to jump through some hoops, but it is possible. So I'm actually streaming this to PC via Game Pass. In particular, I just grabbed one of their trials so I could play this for the allotted time. Now the catch there is, if you're specifically on PC and you want to stream this, you do have to remember that PC controls do not work. So you are going to have to play it with a controller one way or the other. And while I don't actually own one for myself, luckily my dad and brothers play a lot of Xbox, so I was able to grab one from them, and that's how we got here. Now if you're actually on the Xbox console, this is significantly easier. You can actually just buy it digitally and download it. Now, in both cases, if you want the DLC that came with the game, you are going to have to pay for those, as they are not free with the base game, which honestly surprised me a little bit just given how old this is, but I suppose they have to make their money back somewhere. Now, personally, I had heard that streaming this game to PC could be a little choppy, but honestly, so far so good. But naturally, we'll see how that holds up over the course of the entire experience. But so far, the only things I've really messed with there are just things that are problems with the game in general, such as your character kind of feeling like you're on ice skates, or some of the button prompts being very strange in their timing. For instance, there are jobs you can do in Fable 2, and you're supposed to hit the button while the game is moving a dot into a green zone, and I know for a fact on every variation of Fable 2 that this has never been quite correct. Sometimes it'll say you got it even when you clearly didn't, and vice versa. So the game has plenty of jank all on its own, even without streaming problems. Long story short, though, Fable 2 is probably the least accessible of the original Fable trilogy, but with it being added to Game Pass, you do have at least a few options outside of simply owning a physical copy, which, while certainly an elegant solution, is better than nothing, I suppose. So let's get on to the game itself. Now, happy to report here, the game is a little bit better than I remember it being, which has been nice, but I still also got to a few parts where I was like, oh yeah, I hated this, which is mostly the magic system. So in the original game, Fable 1, you simply bought the spells and then you could upgrade them as you go. After that, they simply bound to your hotbar and you could use them at will. Well, for whatever reason, in Fable 2, probably because the spells were so overpowered, to be honest, they changed that system. In Fable 2, you get spells the same way, but instead of just casting them easily, there's a charge up associated with them, which means if you want spells to not suck, you need to charge them. And trying to charge them while simultaneously toggling between their focused or surround area spells just never felt great to me, and honestly is just a straight downgrade from the first one as far as I'm concerned. And if I remember correctly, Fable 3 actually changed this again to a sort of glove system, but that's neither here nor there. Now, following along with my own memories, I also remember that I didn't enjoy the story very much, but truth be told, it's been so long, I'd be hard-pressed to tell you exactly why. I just remember that I wasn't fond of the ending, as I remember it being a choice between a bunch of useless stuff, and then you have to reconnect with other lost heroes throughout the game, none of which were particularly interesting. But outside of those things, I've been pleasantly reminded that Fable 2 did actually upgrade, I'd say, a fair few things from the original game. For starters, your interactions with villagers and even things like buying property are more nuanced here, even if they functionally work the same way. So things like your character's attractiveness or how villagers react to you and even what those villagers do throughout the day and night cycle are slightly more complex. There are more variables involved and it's a more interesting system as a result, especially because it allows you to more easily interact with them immediately as opposed to having to gather renown like you did in Fable 1. And while that's here as well, you could also just interact with villagers before you do that, is what I mean. But then you have stuff like property. So rather than having to kill the owner of a given building to make it available to you, Fable 2 does actually allow you to purchase buildings outright, even if they are owned, but you'll usually have to pay more as a result. So you could theoretically still go around murdering people who own buildings only to make them cheaper for you if you're doing a purely evil run. You can also get jobs, as I mentioned, which you can get promotions for and get a bunch of easy gold to then spend on all those houses you want to buy. And honestly, just buying up property, as these games are known for, is an easy, very early way to break the economy that naturally I enjoy engaging with. But that stuff aside, one kind of interesting thing I do remember about Fable 2 that I actually did enjoy is that it introduces firearms by throwing the game pretty far into the future from the original, an undisclosed amount of time. But basically, in between 1 and 2, villagers finally had enough of the Guild of Heroes and their nonsense and burned the place to the ground one day, and the descendants of a few heroes who just so happen to have lived are all that remains, which just so happens to be our character, and this time around you can choose to be either a boy or a girl, as opposed to just a little boy from Oakvale. In either case, though, you are subject to terrible poverty, only to focus on buying a magic musical box that you think might grant a wish at the behest of Teresa, who you'll also remember from the first game, who should definitely be dead by now, but that's a story for another time. And then using that musical box actually garners the attention of the king of the castle your poverty-stricken youths would like to inhabit, which is what they wished for, and so they think their wish is being granted only for the king to actually kill or attempt to kill both of you, but only successfully kill your sister, as your ability to activate that musical box has marked you as a true hero of old. And then sometime later, as we grow up, in the loving care of Teresa herself, we find ourselves ready to set out on the world and wreak our terrible vengeance or righteous fury. And that's a decent enough start. Again, I really enjoy that they added firearms and the things like that. But again, I remember really not enjoying this story, so it'll be curious to sort of rediscover it and either remember why specifically I didn't enjoy it or see if my opinions changed, I guess. But in either event, one thing that really hasn't changed is that combat continues to not be very fun. So just like before, we have physical, ranged, and will or magic, and ranged this time uses crossbows or guns, physical of course just being your standard weapons, and then magic being magic. Now, they did change this around a little bit in the sense that armor no longer gives you like actual armor stats and stuff, it's all cosmetic, but having relatively recently played through the original game, I did notice that groups of enemies in this one are significantly less aggressive, which I have to think is almost certainly due to the way they pared down the magic system to require charge times, and in order to actually charge those magic abilities, you're going to need openings, which I would assume is probably why that's the case. But the problem with that is that when you're not using magic and just, shooting, for instance, you'll be taking out enemies and they won't even seemingly be trying to fight back. So hopefully that improves, but I don't recall it ever being very difficult, so it probably didn't. But learning all about that stuff, seeing how your character grows and changes as the result of your interactions with these systems, including your choices and morals, being a good or bad person, affecting your physical appearance alongside your stats as well, such as improving the skill, making you taller, is what I'm looking forward to enjoying about this game, or at least as much as I can, as stuff like that is where Fable as a series really shined. But I think it'll be interesting, especially to see exactly what my memory versus reality is going to be here, because just with this first look, there are things that are certainly a little better than I remembered, and other things where, yeah, it's about as bad as I recalled it being. So that's the kind of thing I'll have in mind as I move to review this one, which shouldn't take terribly long. I have a few other things to do before I turn my attention fully to it, but it's a very short game, much like the other two in the original trilogy, so realistically, it shouldn't take that long. Probably only a couple days once it has my full attention, and thus you'll see a review for this one not terribly long from now. So if you're looking forward to that, or you simply enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Let me know how you feel about it down in the comment section below. What are some of your memories of this one? But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.